I have often thought that the simplest civilities in life can be among the hardest to practice. It requires very little effort indeed to call someone by the name or pronoun they prefer, and yet a curious mania has arisen in which certain self-proclaimed champions of Western civilization find themselves mortally offended by such a trifling gesture. Astonishing, is it not? Here we stand with the entire cosmos of serious moral quandaries open before us: war, famine, bigotry, the survival of Enlightenment values, and some stout bearded chap is raging mightily because a student requested they-them pronouns in a classroom. I, for one, do not tremble at the idea of having to utter an unfamiliar pronoun any more than I tremble at an unusual name or an accent different from my own. However, so cherished are these trifling symbolic markers of identity that they have become the fresh battleground of the culture wars. Some find the whole panoply of pronouns downright silly. Well, let us suppose you do find them silly. Even then you have a choice: use them or not. It is a courtesy, not the 10 Commandments. One needn't align oneself as a devout celebrant of every new pronoun that bursts onto the scene, but one ought to be able to muster a bare minimum of civility. Politeness costs nothing, after all. This, however, differs significantly from a conscious effort to refuse someone's pronouns as a means of punishment or humiliation. That's not mere skepticism toward woke culture. No, that's elementary boorishness, like going out of your way to spit in a friend's teacup before handing it to them. Indeed, if misgendering is an expression of your deep philosophical conviction that only you understand true biology, it's rather reminiscent of those old totalitarian states that insisted on reclassifying individuals despite their evident realities. Nothing admirable or heroic about that. Nothing that even faintly resembles the courtesy or rationality that people often ascribe to the defense of Western civilization. Consider the absurdity. The same big-lunged gentlemen who bray about snowflakes are the most easily wounded themselves by a mere 3-letter pronoun or the usage of they as singular. All that bravado and beard undone by an innocuous set of letters. It would almost be comedic were it not so pitiful. In the pantheon of great oratory, these self-congratulatory orators stand upon the dais to proclaim, "I shall not call you she because I know better and I am the vanguard of moral rectitude." Meanwhile, to the rest of the world it appears they are howling at a cloud. But here is the crux. If one does intend to fling misgendering back as an act of protest, say to turn the tables on these self-appointed gatekeepers of masculinity, why not call them ma'am or madam? If they are truly so callously indifferent to others' sense of identity, let's see how they like it. Watch as they rage, their faces reddening with each syllable of yes, ma'am, their spittle forming around every attempt to exculpate their own histrionics. One might find such a performance therapeutic, if only to show how easily their fortress of stoic manliness collapses, the moment they are addressed as something they do not wish to be. And oh, the spectacle is truly something to behold, a grizzled, swaggering patriarch, flexing rhetorical muscles about keeping men as men and women as women, suddenly thunderstruck by madam. The meltdown can be downright operatic. "How dare you insult me?" he squeals, outraged. So we discover that in the end they are not immune to that sense of violation or humiliation. It's their own personal preference, you see, to be Mr. or Sir or what have you. If you insist on the contrary, particularly if you do so with a polite, unwavering tone that leaves no room for them to accuse you of harassment, they experience exactly the indignity they so gleefully inflict on trans people. And here is the crucial difference. Our trans friends or fellow humans ask often meekly, "Could you please call me by this pronoun?" The so-called defenders of tradition respond with moral panic and legislative crackdowns, citing the downfall of civilization. Meanwhile, that same brand of swaggering conservative so loath to recognize a trans woman's she, her, can be reduced to a sputtering meltdown by the mildest ma'am. Notice, too, that when trans people are routinely misgendered, the response tends to be sorrow, sometimes anger, often heartbreak, but rarely do you see them threaten to unleash the hounds of war. Yet call a reactionary blowhard miss for a single moment, and see if their peacock feathers stay unruffled. They will holler that you have committed an unpardonable sin. Quite the paradox, the snowflake is not who we thought it was. Thus, while I do not condone rudeness for its own sake, it must be said that exposing the hypocrisy is undeniably instructive. If you discover that calling a trans man she day after day is acceptable in their eyes, but calling your local bearded paragon of Western values madam for 5 seconds triggers world historical rage, then perhaps the only conclusion is that you're dealing with a pack of bullies who can dish it out but cannot take it. It comes down to principle. Even if you scoff at the proliferation of pronouns or don't fully grasp the nuances, you can still choose to be basically courteous. You can still adhere to the rule that a free and civilized society depends on our willingness to live and let live, to call people what they wish to be called. Meanwhile, the overcooked rhetoric about cultural Marxism, woke tyranny, or undermining Western civilization is laid bare as the melodramatic flapdoodle that it is. Those who fear they-them as a threat to our grand inheritance from Athens and Jerusalem might do well to recall that the West, and indeed any civilization worth defending, hinges upon magnanimity, rational discourse, and mutual respect. And if all that fails, if you meet the proud reactionary who will not be moved by reason or decency, then by all means raise one eyebrow, pause, and serenely address them as ma'am. Let them taste the bitterness of not being recognized for the identity they would like so dearly to cling to. Their outrage will be immediate and, for a moment at least, illuminating. They may realize, if only faintly, that there is nothing especially noble about stomping on someone else's pronouns while demanding slavish obedience to their own. Hence, let us champion empathy and courtesy as the measure of any decent society. Pronouns, though they may appear small, are an emblem of mutual acknowledgement, requiring near-zero effort for a payoff of human dignity. And if those burly gatekeepers of tradition cannot bear that modest courtesy, well, the next time they try to lecture you on manliness, you know precisely how to greet them. Enjoy the show, madam.